The Men's Forum. Let me introduce some of our guests. Daniel McGraw, who's Ashland Town Council. Daniel, that's the only one that's here. You're the only dignitary, right?
As far as I can tell, I think Woody used to be on council, if I'm not mistaken. So she's a dignitary. And Trevor is a member of the first DC, the first congressional district for the Virginia Democratic Party.
Right.
So yeah, so that's all I know. If other people have other titles, I'm not aware. And then of course, Brian is the person for the Virginia 2021.
It's now Fair Maps VA. I assume that Josh Anderson with Kasim's campaign, Ryan Jackson from Mark Warner's campaign, and Robert Morissette with Joe Biden's campaign. That's true. Assume none of you are available. I guess not.
I'm here, Josh. Hi.
Yeah, oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a few words about the campaign?
Going good. We're got our thank you so much. We got our GOTV universe all set to go. So everybody who likes calls and lit drops, yeah, I can put my email and phone number in the chat, and if anyone wants to make calls and lit drops, that's the main thing we're doing now. And we're also looking for lit hubs for in October, and the people who can either in their front yard or in a parking lot, set up to pass out lit to other lit droppers, and also phone captains for through the month of October and whatnot for our GOTV.
Okay.
Yep.
Put those in words that we can understand.
Mainly just, if anybody's ready to phone bank and lit drop.
We have phone banking, and lit drop means going door to door?
Yes, but not knocking.
Not knocking.
Just dropping a lit, not having to endanger yourself in that sense. Yeah.
So we're not doing any door to door?
No, we're not knocking.
I agree. We're phone banking and texting?
Yes, texting is a little bit delayed, but we were before, and we'll have some more up in probably about a week or so to go.
Are you automatic dial, or are you we make phone calls off your list?
We have an open virtual phone bank that you can self-dial.
Forum.
And we also have
The Democratic Committee.
Hi, Mike.
And we also have an auto dialer set up. We just got it set up now through Talk.
Okay.
For people who want to do that. Yes. So we've got both.
So
go ahead.
If you could put your contact information. Need to say, we need to win this election for all three guys, especially with what's happening in the Supreme Court. We can't afford to let Trump be in charge of all three. There'd be no democracy left, but we need to work our ass to get our three people elected. And if anybody wants to volunteer, you can volunteer through Josh for Kasim, and Ryan Jackson for Mark Warner, and Robert Morissette for Joe Biden. And Chance, can you put up those other contacts for Mark Warner and Joe Biden?
Already done.
Good. Okay, discussion tonight is the Virginia Constitutional Amendment #1 regarding redistricting. I believe we all feel the need to stop gerrymandering and have redistricting done in an appropriate manner so it's fair. So we're not debating whether we have redistricting or gerrymandering tonight. We're looking at the pros and cons of the amendment, which will be on the ballot in November that some of us already have voted on. Let me read you what it says on the ballot. Should the Constitution of Virginia be amended to establish a redistricting commission consisting of 8 members of the General Assembly and 8 citizens of the Commonwealth that is responsible for drawing the congressional and state legislative districts that will be subsequently voted on, but not changed by the General Assembly and enacted without the governor's involvement, and to give the responsibility of drawing districts to the Supreme Court of Virginia if the redistricting commission fails to draw districts or the General Assembly fails to enact districts by certain deadlines. That's what it says. If people can, I don't think that says the whole. I don't think that says the whole thing, but we'll get into the pros and cons of it. We flipped the coin, and Trevor is going to be the first speaker. He's opposing the amendment, and Brian Cannon will be speaking afterwards, voting yes on the amendment. Let's let these people speak, and we'll have 10-15 minutes for each, and then we'll follow by questions. So don't interrupt their speech, and we'll do the questions afterwards. Trevor?
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you everybody for being on this evening. I am going to see if I can manage to share my screen with you here. So you should be able to see my PowerPoint now, or maybe you see my email. Can somebody let me know which one you see?
Say no to gerrymandering.
Ah, there we go. Beautiful. I did something that worked. So I'm here tonight on behalf of Fair Districts, which is a new organization, was formed a little over a month ago, and we are basically the coalition working to encourage folks to vote no on Amendment 1. You can find out more information about us at fairdistrictsva.com. So I want to go into the reasons to vote no. The biggest one is Amendment 1 does not end gerrymandering. Gerrymandering in itself was actually made illegal in the 2020 session by House Bill 1255 from Marcia Price. It ended racial gerrymandering, it ended political gerrymandering. I also believe it ended prison gerrymandering, if I'm not mistaken. Amendment 1, however, by itself, it gets called a lot of things. Sometimes it gets called nonpartisan. It is strictly not nonpartisan. It is actually bipartisan. The commission that would be formed as a result of Amendment 1's passage would be half Democratic and half Republican. That is not nonpartisan, that's bipartisan. It would cut out the possibility of any third parties participating. It would leave it to the 8 legislative leaders that are chosen for the commission to be the people who drive redistricting in Virginia. And that goes into the next point. It is not independent. The commission will be made up of 16 people. It would be made up of 8 legislative leaders and 8 citizens. But the citizens would essentially be picked by the legislative leaders. Technically, they're picked by a panel of judges. But those judges are choosing from a list that the legislative leaders give them. So when you hear that there's going to be 8 citizens on the commission, they're not talking about just average, everyday Virginians. They're talking about people that have connections to our legislative leaders. They're talking about people that work in politics. They're talking about lobbyists. Quite frankly, they're talking about people like me and Brian. They're talking about people that have allegiances, that have been in this business, and that know the legislative leaders. They're not just going to go through a phone book and say, this name, I think that person would be good. So it's not nonpartisan. It's not independent. It's not citizen-led. It would also reduce Black and brown voices. Now, what I mean by that is simple. On that 16-member commission, there is nothing that says what those 16 members have to be made up of in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of region. We currently have over 30 Black and brown members of the General Assembly. This commission would reduce their numbers to less than a handful. And in a state as diverse as Virginia is, we need assurances that Black and brown Virginians will be represented. We need assurances that women will be represented. We need assurances that Southwest Virginia will be represented. We get none of those assurances through Amendment 1. Now, a bunch of people, when we bring up that point, they say to me, you know, I know that Speaker Fillercorn is going to appoint Black people to this commission. I know that Louise Lucas and Dick Saslaw and Mamie Locke are going to appoint Black people to this commission. And yes, that is correct. I trust our current Democratic leadership to make sure that Black and brown voices are heard. I do not know who's going to be in Democratic leadership in 10, 20, or 30 years. And if we put this into the Constitution, it will likely still be there in 10, 20, and 30 years. I used an example one time. I told people, I said, you know, go back to 1860 and tell the Democratic caucus, the House Democratic Caucus of 1860, that the Speaker of the House of Delegates is a Jewish woman and the majority leader is a Black woman, and see what their reaction is. And, you know, that would be amusing. But just go back and tell the House Democratic Caucus of 1990 or of 2000 that same thing. They probably wouldn't believe you. So I do not know what our party's going to represent in 30 years. And that's what scares me, because there is no assurance that Black and brown Virginians are going to be heard. Another issue with the amendment is that 2 members of either party could block it. The way the amendment is written, it has to get a supermajority of the elected members on the commission from each chamber to vote for their maps. So that means you've got to have 3 out of 4 delegates. You've got to have 3 out of 4 senators. That means, for example, you could have a circumstance where the vote is 14-2. But if it's the right 2, the maps are scrapped. Have you ever heard a situation where a chair of a committee says, the ayes are 14, the noes are 2, the motion fails? That doesn't happen, but it could under this amendment. For those reasons that I've named, Amendment 1 is fatally flawed. There are other issues with it too. A lot of people talk about the issue with the Supreme Court. I'm not even going into that one. These issues in front of us tell us that the amendment is flawed. Now you might ask, isn't it better to do something rather than doing nothing? The answer is no. Again, HB 1255, it passed in 2020. It passed, by the way, on a straight party line vote, with all the Democrats voting for it, all the Republicans against it. So when you hear, oh, if we have a no vote, it's going to be just like 2011. No, it won't be, because HB 1255 was not around in 2011. You're going to have a new setup. You're going to have a new situation. For that matter, you practically have almost a new House of Delegates. Over half the members of the House of Delegates were not there in 2011. So you're looking at a new House of Delegates to run the redistricting process. And a constitutional amendment is very hard to change. It's supposed to be right when we put it in our Constitution. You're not supposed to say, we ought to pass this amendment and then work on it to try to make it better. It should be right from the start. This one isn't. Now, tonight, talking to a Democratic crowd, we're all Democrats on this call. And if you're a Virginia Democrat, I want to give you some reasons to vote no. And here they are. Amanda Chase, Mark Cole, Tim Hugo, Todd Gilbert, and Kirk Cox. They all want you to vote yes. Mark Cole, up here in the corner, he was the chairman of the House Privileges and Elections Committee. He was the guy that for years stopped every attempt to end gerrymandering. Amanda Chase, we all know. I don't need to say anything else. Tim Hugo was the chairman of the House Republican Caucus, and he's running for lieutenant governor next year. Todd Gilbert is the leader of the House Democratic Caucus. He would be the speaker if Republicans win back the majority in the House. Kirk Cox is the former Speaker of the House. He's running for governor next year. Now, when you look at what they're saying here, notice Kurt Cox. He calls it the Nonpartisan Redistricting Commission. That doesn't exist. There is not going to be a nonpartisan redistricting commission. Now, Tim Hugo at least gets it right because he talks about bipartisan redistricting. Mark Cole says we're going to end partisan gerrymandering. Again, not the case. We also have several Democratic and progressive leaders and organizations that have come out recently to oppose Amendment 1, New Virginia Majority, Progress Virginia, SEIU. Linda Perriello, a former chair of One Virginia 2021. The state convention of the state party this year voted in pretty overwhelming fashion for a no vote, as well as over 30 of our local Democratic committees representing the majority of the Commonwealth, including, of course, the most important, Hanover County. But also you can see a lot of great other counties, and there's more that have happened recently that haven't been added in there, that have recommended a no vote. Democrats are the party of good government. That is what makes us different from Republicans in the essence of governing. Republicans put everything on winning. We want good government. Republicans controlled the General Assembly. They controlled the House of Delegates for 20 years. For 90% of that time, subcommittee meetings were hidden in darkness. They weren't broadcast. They weren't recorded. They would run on voice vote. You never really knew what happened, except for a lot of bills died. A few years ago, thanks to the rise in the Democrats, we changed that. Now those meetings are live streamed. They're available to the public. You can watch them. During the 20 years the Republicans had the majority, they never allowed nonpartisan or independent redistricting to be considered. The only time they allowed it a vote was when they knew they were losing their majority and when they saw that they had something that wasn't nonpartisan or independent that they could use to their advantage in the future. So this is a famous sign that we've all seen from One Virginia 2021. You've been gerrymandered. On one side, they have a Democratic drawn district. On the other side, they have a Republican drawn district. And this is from the 2011 maps. The person who drew the Senate maps is the sponsor of this constitutional amendment. So that's what we're looking at. The person that drew these gerrymanders that One Virginia 2021 opposed is the person who is sponsoring the constitutional amendment that they now support. Even One Virginia 2021 says this isn't an independent commission. If you look at this screen here, on one side you see an email from 2014. And this was the original start of One Virginia 2021. And if you look at that last line there, it says, our goal is in 2021, Virginia's legislative and congressional districts will be drawn in accordance with plans created by a nonpartisan independent redistricting commission. This commission is not nonpartisan. This commission is not independent. And then you see a tweet from earlier this year. This is from March 6th of 2020, talking about SJ 18. And it says here, it'll take a lot more work to get a truly independent redistricting commission through the General Assembly. So again, this is not an independent commission. This is not a nonpartisan commission. Why are we fighting so hard for it? And the reason is simple. At some point, the Yes campaign changed. It morphed from fighting for nonpartisan independent redistricting to getting a win. This is the opportunity to get a win. This is what was offered. It's a Constitutional Amendment 1. And the Yes campaign decided they would go with that because they'd rather have a win than keep fighting for nonpartisan independent redistricting reform. Now, a lot of things you hear about, you hear about the media battle. You hear about newspaper endorsements. One Virginia 2021 has been around for 6 years. Many of you on this call have supported that organization. Many of you have worked with it. It has a really good reputation for what it stood for. So,
Trevor, you have about 2 minutes.
awesome. It has not been realized by everyone that it changed, that at some point it morphed from nonpartisan independent redistricting to just getting a yes vote. They also have a lot of big money behind them. It's impressive, quite frankly. In the last couple of weeks, they've gotten $500,000 from Illinois, $250,000 from Texas, $25,000 from a North Carolina Republican donor, and $10,000 from a George W. Bush appointee. And there's more than that. They've raised really good money. They have a lot of money behind their effort. But when we come back to it again, here are your reasons to vote no. This amendment does not end gerrymandering. It would make it worse. It would take the process and make 8 legislative leaders into political gods. They would hold the power to redistrict any of our 140 legislators within their hands. So instead of having 140 people involved, you just have 8. That kills the transparency. I hope you check us out online, follow us on Twitter, and give us a like on Facebook.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, sir. Let me see if I can get back to the Zoom screen.
Make sure you stop share.
Yep, that's what I'm trying to figure out how to do.
It should be either at the top of your screen or at the bottom of your screen.
Ah, there it is. Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Brian Cannon.
Hey, y'all. So that's a lot to unpack. I don't know whether I'm grateful or not that I get to go second, but thank you all.
Let me say that I did work with One Virginia in 2021.
Appreciate your support. Anyway, I'm grateful for you guys having this conversation. I think it's really important. Let me start out at the top line. Trevor puts up a lot of straw men and argues that it's not nonpartisan, it's not independent, and we don't say that. I'm very honest about what this amendment is. It is not everything I want. It is significant and important reform. And I think the question is it all we can get for right now? And does it help us get more in the future? As a reformer, that's what I would want to know. The answer to both of those questions, however, is yes. It is all we can get right now as far as a constitutional amendment goes. And it's probably all we could get as far as legislation goes, even if legislation would be non-binding. But in the bigger picture, does it help us get more reform? And that is also an unequivocal yes. But let me be clear. I do not say this is an independent commission. I do not say this is a nonpartisan commission. I'm not even sure what a nonpartisan commission is, because the best commissions out there that we would model off of, like California, have an even number of Republicans and Democrats. And they also have an independent section too, which would be great to have as well. But there's balance between the parties, and there's checks on each of them to do it. By the way, in both the probably 2 best structured commissions, Michigan and California, you could either have 2 or 3 people block the commission. That's the same thing in Virginia's model as well. So there's nothing new there. Those are supermajority requirements, and those are good. But let me tell you what the amendment does. The amendment does several things. First of all, it ends partisan gerrymandering. Second of all, it makes racial gerrymandering illegal under the state constitution for the first time in 401 years. Third, it adds a hell of a lot of transparency. There'll be no more smoky back rooms, so open meetings, open data. That's critical for watchdog organizations like One Virginia, but also like Princeton Gerrymandering Project, Tufts University, et cetera. And finally, it has actual seats at the table for citizens for the first time ever. There will be citizens at the table with an equal say. Now, Trevor mentions that, basically the 4 legislative leaders making the pick are Louise Lucas and Eileen Fillercorn, and then Tommy Norment and Todd Gilbert. I really like 2 of those people. I really am not a huge fan of the other 2, but I don't expect anything great out of those people. I'm not asking for miracles here. I'm asking for partisan balance. We don't register by party here, so it's hard to identify who's a R or who's a D. So it's easy, but the legislators are good at that. One thing partisan politicians are very good at is finding out who's on their team and who's not. So this amendment works through those legislative leaders to get folks. Now, I think what's important to know is each of those legislative leaders on the citizen side have to recommend 16 people each. So the total pool is 64, gets winnowed down by a group of judges, and then you get your 8 citizens on the commission. Now, I have more hope for those citizens that they would actually be good. I don't think I stand much of a chance personally of getting appointed to this thing, and I wouldn't want to be even if they were asking. But here's what I'll say. Even if those citizens are just as partisan as the legislators are, even if they're all party hacks, the thing to be said is they're at least even party hacks, right? Because that means no party can get over on the other under the structure of this amendment. But there are other things I would like to do. I would love for the citizens not to have been registered lobbyists in pick X number of years back, to not be a member of a state central committee, to not be a former legislator, right? I think those are all valid critiques on this. And the General Assembly could act tomorrow and fix that. They're in session. They could put that language in the budget, pass it, and it would go into effect. But they haven't. And I don't know how else to say this. The Democrats are in charge. They have the votes if they wanted to do it. And the SB 203, which had all the enabling legislation, including those filters on the commission, that was killed in a conference committee by 2 of the board members for Trevor's organization, Delegate Marcus Simon and Delegate Sia Price. They went into conference committee and sunk what was otherwise it got 86 votes in the House of Delegates when it went in there. So it was a very bipartisan bill. It was definitely what was agreed upon about all the guardrails and everything we'd want on there. The amendment's brief. I wish it were longer, but we don't do long amendments in Virginia. But the people who killed that were the Democrats. It was Price and Simon. And the reason they did it is because it would then allow Trevor to go around telling people in November, hey, this isn't perfect, see all these things. And I was like, we had bipartisan agreement here. I would hope that if Democrats really cared about making this right, that they would focus on the policy and not the politics, but that's not what we're getting out of them. So just a tiny little point about how frequently we amend the Constitution, because Trevor said it's hard. And it's not easy. It's not designed to be easy. But in the last 14 years, we've amended the Constitution 12 times. So it's not infrequent either. It actually happens a lot. And now that the Democrats have the majority, they're free to do it for what they want. Let me also say on the racial gerrymandering piece that if you think about right now, the racial gerrymandering protections in the constitutional amendment that would be independent freestanding protections there are basically a recitation of the federal law. And I don't mean that they're just saying there is federal law. I mean, it's taking what the federal law is and putting it in the state constitution. That's huge. So racial gerrymandering would be illegal under the state constitution. What's important though is I've always described that as like a belt and suspenders approach, because at the federal level, we've been protected on the Voting Rights Act and on the interpretation of the 14th Amendment to put guardrails up on cracking and packing minority communities. But as of last Friday, with the passing of Justice Ginsburg, I don't know if that protection is still there. So I think it is important that we add that into the state constitution. And then the last thing I'll say is about transparency. Right now, legislative privilege protects all of it. And it's really hard to get any information about what they're doing. But if you have this amendment, everything has to be done in the public. I think sunlight goes a long way. All right, let me hit some of the points that Trevor made as well here. He said that there are 30 Black and brown people in the state legislature. I'll take him at his word for that. I haven't counted, but that's 21%. If on our legislative commission, and I really do trust Louise Lucas and Eileen Philliphorn to appoint a diverse group of people, if they just appoint one legislator each and one citizen each, we'll be at 25%. People of color will be at 25% rather than 21%. So this doesn't diminish their voices. There's a perfect opportunity here to do it. There's 2 ways you can go about achieving good outcomes in this. One, you can structurally design it so it achieves that. The other is you could write it on a sheet of paper and say, this is the law, right? Both are good. I want both. The writing on a piece of paper is SB 203. They could pass that again tomorrow if they wanted to. But structurally, you're going to get it too, which is important. In fact, the problem is you can't actually mandate you have, X number of seats for Black and brown people, because that'll get thrown out by the courts. All you can really say is it reflects the diversity of the Commonwealth and then define what diversity is. That's great, but you'd have to sue to enforce it. It's much better to have a structure that would promote it, and we do. The other thing, there's a lot of the GOP supports this and therefore you shouldn't. I think that's just such bullshit scare tactics, y'all. I'm going to be frank. That's ridiculous. Of course they support it. They're in the minority. Every minority party in the whole country supports redistricting reform. The Republicans in Maryland are spectacular reformers, right? Just like the Democrats in North Carolina are before they, except for when they were in the majority, right? It happens all the time. And if you're looking for examples of this, California has unequivocally the best redistricting commission in the country, and it's worked out phenomenally. And Nancy Pelosi spent $10 million to try to defeat it, right? Because they're the party in power. This year, there were 6 states that had redistricting reform either on or going to the ballot. We're the only one left in the whole country. North Dakota's got booted, but 2 blue states got booted too, right? They were on their ballot in Oregon and Nevada. They were headed their way. They had in Oregon, they had a favorable court ruling allowing them to collect signatures during COVID that was going to help for that. The Democratic AG in Oregon went all out, appealed all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court to remove that lower court's ruling, and now Oregon doesn't have reform on their ballot. The governor of Nevada, when asked to give leniency on signature requirements because of COVID, the governor was like, no. So, the majority party always fights it. They look exactly like the Republicans did in Oklahoma and in Arkansas this year too. So it's just the same song everywhere. So the fact that there's a group opposing this that's composed of Democratic delegates and Democratic Party insiders is not breaking news. It is really dog bites man. But I want to address something else Trevor said about the this won't be like 2011, because I think a lot of what he boiled down to, and Trevor, I'm grateful you didn't go into the SCOVA thing, because I think that's such tinfoil hat conspiracy theory to think that SCOVA would actually gerrymander. And oh, by the way, it goes there anyway, because if the Democrats draw their maps, the Republicans are going to sue, it's going to get there. But, and the Democrats put that provision in the amendment in 2019. But the other kind of chunk of things that you hear from them is a pinky promise of we'll do more. And I don't believe it. And I'm a Democrat and I wish I did. And here's the reason why I don't believe it. Because if I were in charge of the House Democrats, if I were perhaps director of their caucus last year, and I knew they wanted to oppose the amendment, then I would have worked really hard to do one of 2 other things. One, pass a new constitutional amendment. Even though it's a first read, it wouldn't apply right away. Pass a new first read constitutional amendment that would bind us for the future. They didn't have the votes to do that. They didn't even try. They didn't even come up with one until for Marcus Simon until the day before the vote. And the other one that Delegate Levine proposed, which we really like, was killed in Rules on a Voice Committee vote, on a Rules Committee on a voice vote. So they're just not serious about a constitutional amendment. But even then, they did introduce other bills that would have been independent, if only advisory, for next year's redistricting, which would be better than nothing, right? Like I'm not a perfectionist on this. We don't have that luxury. But they introduced those bills, and when Delegate Price introduced hers in the House P&E subcommittee, she changed it from an independent advisory commission to an advisory commission that looks like the amendment structure, right? And I was floored that she did that. We said nice things about the amendment. We weren't lobbying or anything against it. It would have been a good plan B. But she said, I don't have the votes in the House or the Senate to get past an independent redistricting commission. So when Trevor and the Vote No crowd are saying, trust us, we'll do better, I call BS, because they just don't have the votes to do it. I wish they did. I've worked for 7 years on this thing, but there just aren't the votes for a truly independent commission. The other thing I'll say is that if you want to see what these current Democrats would do with the power to draw maps, you should look at 2018. Because 2018 was after that big blue wave. We got a lot of awesome new Democrats in that House caucus. And when they got the opportunity to redistrict, Delegate Price said she watched her colleagues turn into golems. What happened was the court said, hey, these are racially gerrymandered districts. You've got 12 districts in Virginia. You've packed black voters in there. 11 of those districts are unconstitutional. Please redraw. They gave the General Assembly 3 months to fix it. Obviously, they didn't do it. The court took back. But what happened in those 3 months, if I could have waved a wand, would have been public hearings, talk to the minority communities that have been disenfranchised by this, all, transparent, do the thing you say you want to do. But they didn't do any of that. Instead, they went in the proverbial smoky back room. They came up with a map that was just as racially gerrymandered, though differently, but just as racially gerrymandered as Republicans. Tufts University did an analysis of their maps, and the Republican plan would have taken them from 12 black districts and added 1 more, it would have been a 13th. The Democratic plan would have taken them from 12 black districts, added 1 more, would have been a 13th. The Princeton gerrymandering came up with a plan to maximize Black representation in legislature, and they added 3 new Black districts. And so did the Tufts University kind of supercomputer said that on average, even on a race blind draw, you get 3 new districts. So, actually the chair of Trevor's board there stood on the floor of the House P&E committee and said that both the Democrat and Republican maps were racial gerrymanders. And that's not news, but it is important to know that it's not. I don't even have to go back to 2011 to tell you about Democrats. I can tell you about Democrats right now. And those would be the people drawing the maps. I don't want, as Sia Price calls them, golems in charge of the map drawing in 2021. I really don't. I wish I could trust Democrats, and I had a lot more trust in them until watching what they did in 2018. Let me say, oh, Don, you.
Brian, you have about 2 minutes.
Great.
2 minutes.
Let me say that, you know, if the Democrats really wanted something else, they would have put a plan forward. They didn't put an amendment. They didn't put anything forward. It would have been an independent commission for 2021. They just don't have a plan. They're not that serious about it, I think, because they should have fixed it. Let me address the contributions thing, though. If you saw that there's a lot of fear tax that Trevor's throwing at you, and the biggest one is that we have some $500,000 donation from Illinois. Let me tell you who that's from. That's from Unite America. It's from Catherine Murdoch. And she is of the Murdoch family, but she's the Democratic black sheep of that. You can check her receipts. She's given over $1 million to the Biden for President campaign. She and Unite America are reformers, and they fight for reform in red states and blue states, and I'm happy to have their support. The others are John and Laura Arnold, and that's the Arnold Foundation. They made a ton of money in commodities trading in the 80s. They're giving it all, or in the aughts, they're giving it all away. They do criminal justice reform. They're working on pushing citizen review boards in Virginia right now. They've been working on lowering prescription drug prices and working on democracy reforms all over the country. They've helped Katie Fahey in Michigan. They've helped the folks in Missouri. They've helped Utah. They've been working everywhere to get this done. I don't know if they're Republicans or not, but they're really reformers, which is what I'm appreciative of. But when they throw that stuff around, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors to make you think that we're some like evil organization. Then we're not. It's just, it's so preposterous, but it's so expected, right? The whiplash we get from watching Republicans go from vote no to vote yes, vote no on reform to now they're all vote yes. It's predictable, but it's sad to see the Democrats have the same kind of flip-flop on the back end. So the question is, can we get more reform right now? The answer is no. Can we get more reform later? I think if we smash the smoky back room with this amendment and we force it to be bipartisan, then you really take away the 2 biggest carrots for gerrymandering in the process. Let me close with this and say that if you're looking at the groups of don't believe a partisan paid lobbyists like me, don't believe the same and Trevor. We're both, paid for whatever you want to say about us. But look at all the experts, all the good government groups, all the redistricting reform groups, all in the country are all saying vote yes. And I like to think as Democrats, we listen to experts when it matters and when things get complicated.
Brian, thank you. Trevor.